I'm Angelo Robles, founder and chairman of Family Office Association. My podcast is Effective Family Office, and my book, Effective Family Office Best Practices and Beyond, just released. We hope you have a chance to learn a little bit more and hopefully purchase. I'm joined today by Mark Haltsema, advisor to global single-family offices. Mark, a question for you. Given your experiences for decades internationally in the Middle East and in Russia, the concept of the single-family office is really booming. As global wealth is growing and will, I think, continue to grow, there's always going to be people that are incredibly successful, and they're going to look at the single-family office as being the pinnacle, the ultimate, in what could be of privacy, discretion, value, and service to their family. But there's uniqueness in different cultures around the world. Although some may look at the concept of the single-family office in the UK or in America as being, interesting and something for me to follow, there's going to be certain cultural and issues that are unique to varying countries. One example of that is the US is safe. We've never been, quote unquote, invaded. The government per se, other than taxes, doesn't just reach in and take our money or do anything. Well, again, never say never, but in other parts of the world, these things all happen. So families are usually more paranoid, more concerned about cyber and security issues, about how governments share information. I would love to hear your perspective, someone who's actually living it and has done it for many, many years, the unique perspective on all these issues, and including accountability issues in running the family office for the international family.
Thanks. That's a great question, Angelo. I've spent a considerable part of my career outside the United States, and so I've had the pleasure and the privilege of working with families in various countries of the world in person, and even now in the United States, I continue to work with families overseas. The family office concept is reasonably well built in the U.S. and Western Europe. Given that most of the wealth that we're talking about in emerging market countries in Asia, Africa, former Soviet Union, Latin America, et cetera, is all first-generation wealth. The people that have been building those operating businesses are by definition, first generation. And so they haven't really thought through about governance, succession, and other issues that families in the United States have been looking at. So the whole concept of talent, how do we attract talent? How do we look for outside advisors? How do we confederate with other like-minded families? These are issues that families outside the U.S., depending on which country and which region of the world, of course, really haven't focused on. And so their questions are even broader and deeper than the questions we have. Of course, they have issues about wealth preservation and continuing to build out their operating business. But with foreign families, it's about privacy and confidentiality, specifically depending on the country that they're in, where information is leaked right, left, and center, and of course, family information is at the top of that list. They're very focused on political risk. That impacts their business, their operating business. At the same time, they want to be able to bring their children up in the family office and the family business as well. And so, if you're talking to a family in the Middle East, that'll have a different connotation with respect to the women in the family, as opposed to families in Asia or former Soviet Union and other places. So outside the U.S., it's much more nuanced, it's much more complicated, and it's very much driven by culture. Family is a cultural icon in many, many countries of the world, more so than it is here. And so being able to work with families and attract talent and being held accountable to these families is going to have a different flavor depending on which country you're working in, what type of family, what generation they're in. But the bottom line is that a lot of these families, I think this is good for advisors like ours, these are families that all have questions and where we can add leadership and some context to what they're trying to do based on what we've been able to accomplish with families here in the U.S.
Well, I think certainly a part of this comes down to very simply a term that we haven't even used yet, which is really at the heart of it. It's best practices, best ideas. And to some degree, that means you have to be willing to share what works, what doesn't work for you. So enough of a research database and different varying touch points could be identified, and organizations like what I do and what others do in terms of understanding the nuances geographically, but what works, what doesn't work, what is the size of the family. Yeah, it's going to be different, arguably, for a sub-billion-dollar family comparative to a multi-billion-dollar family. Is there still a family business or not? On the investing side, more passive, more active, more direct, all those factors. There's a million moving parts, but understanding the nuances and benchmarking, but better than benchmarking, really instituting best practices and best ideas, I think benefits more the established, the Switzerland, the UK, the US, and the single family office world, learning from what others are doing, and of course, obviously, vice versa, them learning from us as well. There's not enough of that going on. In your days, being active internationally, how valuable do families believe that best practices really are?
Oh, they believe best practices are paramount. And they're hungry for information about that. Because, again, the family office, being a business, they're still working through building their first generation business in Indonesia, in Ukraine, in Argentina, et cetera. So being able to build a second business around the family office is untrodden territory for them. And so best practices is going to be something they really want to learn about, because they don't see it as often as we do. I mean, best practices is still an issue in this country as well. I mean, again, single family offices can sometimes operate in information silos. And so best practices is something that family offices in a developed economy like the United States are still trying to figure out. Outside the U.S., in emerging market economies, it is, I think a lot of families and a lot of family-owned businesses are still in the question, what's a family office? They don't know what that is. So a best practice for a family office is several questions down the road after you explain what a family office does.
Now, this also begs the question from some of the more emerging markets that you mentioned internationally. One, we're assuming the family of wealth or liquidity knows what a single family office is more and more, but we shouldn't just automatically assume that. How they would have managed their wealth in the past was likely through private banks or even larger scale banks and institutions. And sure, all families need some of the services such organizations provide, and very valuable, but it's not as private or exclusive as your own family office. So my question's gonna be, if they don't know what they don't know, who's gonna help them understand a single family office, and who that they may be talking to is not gonna be conflicted and not want to have the barrier of the single family office between them. So that's my concern with like a private banker who has needed services, but even if they knew about a single family office concept, are they going to talk positively about it and really educate it? And who's going to help that family? There's so few people around the world that really have an expertise in SFOs.
Well, that's true. And depending on the country, they're most certainly not going to trust the banks, private or otherwise. So that's an impediment, not only to managing their wealth, but also to receiving unvarnished advice about what their strategy should be. I guess it's good news for people like ourselves who have had different experiences and different chapters of our lives with different types of families and family businesses, to be able to leverage that wisdom, if you will, and I think the experience leads to wisdom on behalf of these families. And given the fact that the world is increasingly interconnected, usually for good, sometimes for bad, but increasingly interconnected, reaching out or being an advocate, a counselor to these families is becoming easier and easier.
I mean, in some of the countries that you noted where there may be a lack of resources and talent, but I don't want to assume that. There's wonderful talent in every country. Just in certain countries, it's more built out and there's more of them. But in certain of the countries or areas that we're asking about, that is one of the reasons why, as well as certain privacy issues and issues with political upheaval and risk, that they create or open their single family office in Switzerland, in the UK, or in the United States, Canada, Australia, wherever. That's a little bit more established on privacy, debatable, and on contract law, if I could use that word, a little bit more politically stable, and also more resources consistently that have worked or experienced within the single family office. So those parts of the world are often setting up their SFOs in different locations. Do you see that as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was based in Moscow, I know very few Russian families, a few, but not many, that would have their SFO in Russia. No, they wanted it outside the country for various geopolitical reasons. So you'd find the SFO in London or Switzerland, or even here in the US. You don't find very many Americans setting up SFOs outside the United States.
Right,
okay,
right.
And there are lots of reasons for that, and they're all very positive reasons. But you do see an awful lot of families from different parts of the emerging market countries of the world looking at Switzerland, the UK, France, other countries outside the United States where they can set up a single family office. Some of them look at the US, but at the same time, some of them are a little put off by the tax regime in the US and they don't want to trip the wire and become a US taxpayer. But the bottom line is, the common denominator is that they're looking for advice and a platform in a developed economy that can help them build out the single family office.
I'm Angelo Robles, founder and chairman of Family Office Association. Effective Family Office is my podcast, and my book of the same name, Effective Family Office. We hope you enjoyed our video podcast and our series of video podcasts as well. You could reach out to me directly at angelo@angelorobles.com or through Family Office Association, angelo@familyofficeassociation.com, or for some of you, perhaps easier, simply on social media, where we maintain, like Mark, an active LinkedIn presence, as well as Twitter. So reach out to us on YouTube and on Twitter. We are very simply Family Office. Thank you very much.